What's up, brother? It's your boy, Mike Muse. Welcome to another conversation on Mike Muse Show. I'm excited to be in conversation with my next two guests. The timing of this couldn't be perfect. All that's happening right now with society. As you know, I've been talking to you all week long about what's been happening in Afghanistan. And just coincidentally, this interview was scheduled and booked even before we saw the unfortunate outcome of what we've been watching and witnessing, what I've been talking about. I've been talking to you the other day on Wednesday, as a matter of fact, and I was just telling you how difficult it is to cover so much of Afghanistan and how much it is to unpack from a humanitarian aspect, from a political aspect, from a geopolitical narrative, from a potential terrorism, national security, all that's at play, all that's at stake. And what does it mean for America? What does it mean for society? What does it mean for our geopolitical structure, let alone the backdrop of what we're seeing here domestically that is happening with COVID-19, jobs, economic recovery due to COVID-19, racial reckoning, the fight for civil rights, the fight for also voter rights and voter rights protection. And then also too in the backdrop, we have Haiti. So there is just so much happening in the world. And I told you there's no better time to pay attention to politics than right now. We have a seat at the table of history. No matter what your belief system is, no matter what your structure is, no matter what you identify with, this is a way to learn our government. This is a way to learn how we act. I said last week, it's all about that 3 a.m. phone call when you watch presidential debates. How would you act when that 3 a.m. phone call hits, right? And we're seeing that 3 a.m. phone call happen, unfortunately, now every day. So this is why it matters to pay attention. This is why it matters to pay attention to speeches on the floor of Congress and to see how your elected officials are voting, what they're thinking. And this one joining me right now, she has always made her voice known. She has always made her voice present. And she has always made her voice prevalent in spite of adversity, in spite of it not being popular. You know how much I hate Twitter, people. So essentially, she goes against Twitter every single day back then, before there was Twitter. I'm going to just stop talking right now and introduce the women of the hour, Congresswoman Barbara Lee and film director Abby Ginsburg. Welcome, ladies. How are you guys?
Nice being with you. Doing great.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, now they're here today to speak about Congresswoman Lee's new documentary, Barbara Lee Speaking Truth to Power, has been directed by Abby Ginsburg, who is a constituent of the Congresswoman. And it really profiles, I have to say, Congresswoman Lee, I have known you for some time, had some time to spend a little bit of time with you, but I've also too just watched you from afar. And I've learned so much about you and watching this documentary, and I learned more about your Constitution. So thank you for doing this. Thank you for bringing your story to light for all of us to see, witness, and learn, and to really appreciate the magnitude of what is happening. You were the only no vote in Afghanistan. You said no to the unlimited power that presidents could have with sending us to war. I believe the vote was for something to 1. I've always known that about you. That is part of your legacy. But seeing that on film, and that is the power of film, seeing that on film, having you stand up on the floor, seeing you have to go back to your seat and that vote gets announced, that is just 1 and you are it. Talk to us just for a minute about what you were feeling in that moment, the magnitude that you are just 1 against the world in that moment.
Well, thanks, Mike, and thanks for that very generous introduction. And I'm glad you set the table for where we are in this country, because we are at an inflection point. And I think all of these issues have been under the surface, at least for my generation, probably for the last 400 years, 41 years as an African American. But now everything is surfacing at what time. So the intersectionality of all of these issues, which are embedded in issues for justice and peace, are now at the forefront of everyone's mind and agenda. And so how do we go forward? What do we do with all of this? And I guess myself personally, what I was feeling then was almost what I'm feeling today. What the sadness, the anxiety, feeling like everybody was feeling. Anger. We had been terrorized. People died all over the country. I was sitting in the Capitol when Flight 93 was on its way in and we're told to evacuate. My chief of staff, Sandre Swanson, his cousin, Wanda Green, from my area was on Flight 93 as a flight attendant. She and those heroes took that plane down. And who knows what could have happened to myself personally had they not done that, sitting in the Capitol having to evacuate that fateful morning. And so naturally, I was angry, and I'm not looking at the world through rose-colored glasses. I knew we have to bring the terrorists to justice. That's not a question. My dad was a lieutenant colonel, 25-year military man. He served in World War II, the Korean War, and he was in the 92nd Battalion in Italy, all segregated battalions supporting the Normandy invasion. So I'm not, I understand the nature of our military might. But I knew then, and I was feeling like the anger and like everyone else, but the anxiety and the dilemmas that we were dealing with. And the emotions were very real for me, just like for everybody in the country, no difference. But I did know that I was elected to Congress to be rational, to make sure that our Constitution is protected, to make sure Congress does its job, not give its job over to any executive power, the president, for any president. And I knew that that day when I voted no on that authorization, it was 60 words, it was a blank check, it was overly broad, and I knew it was going to set the stage for forever wars. And I've been working since then to repeal it, that authorization and the 2002. And so today, watching what's taking place, I have a lot of the same feelings. I'm angry, I'm sad. I'm working now as subcommittee chair of the appropriations subcommittee that funds a lot of what you see taking place on the diplomatic and humanitarian and development side, working and hoping that we can figure out how to support these evacuations more quickly, more orderly, and bring people to safety and out of harm's way. And there are going to be thousands and thousands and thousands of people who need to evacuate right away. So the feelings are very similar to what I had on 9/11 and 9/14.
So I'm going to dive a little bit deeper in that moment right now, because we are living in a time period, and I'm going to get to you in a sec. We're living in a time, because you really captured it perfectly in this moment I'm sticking to. We're living in a time period where everyone now has become disillusioned and jaded by our democracy. Our democracy is being redefined right in front of us. What is it going to come? I have no idea, but I do believe that it's being redefined currently right now. We're at a point now where elected officials, you can see it right now in terms of how they're handling the response to COVID-19, mask, no mask, vaccine, no vaccine. When they know better, they know the science, but they're choosing their political careers over that. I want to lean more into that, because we're speaking truth to power, but there's also too a profile of courage with you, right? How did you able to disassociate your position, your stance from fear of possibly never being reelected again? Did that come to mind?
Well, there's always life after Congress. First of all, anytime anyone makes decisions based on being reelected, or hard decisions like that didn't come across my mind at all. Believe you me, people told me that. But everyone has moments in their lives where they risk a lot. And that's the risk when it comes to matters of life and death, war and peace. And so I want to be reelected. I love my district. I love public service. I want to keep working for my district and hopefully for the planet. But if decisions are made that are going to cause people to not vote for me, well, you always have to remember that there's a life after whatever you're doing now. And you just can't look back. You learn from the past. That Sankofa moment, the bird, the mythical bird, and the icon, what you got, a bird looking back with an egg in her mouth. Back. Mm-hmm. It's like, we need to learn the lessons of the past so we can create a future and move forward based on the lessons and not make the same mistakes. Well, there's a future. Everyone has another chapter in their lives. And so while I want to continue being elected, I'm going to do everything I can do to serve my constituents and to organize and to do everything. If people decide that they don't want to elect me or whomever, then that's the chips, let the chips fall where they may. So you can't make hard decisions like this based on political decisions and based on politics. I really believe that too.
Audience, I wish you could see me smiling right now, because as you know, audience, you know how I feel about this. You know how I feel about electeds. You know how I feel about politicians. And I've always talked to you, audience, about a lot of times decisions are being made now within the best interest of the elected official and not for their constituencies or self-serving. Congresswoman Lee, I wish more people had your position. I wish more people had your constitution. If I believe that if people were willing to say, I can have a life after politics, I do believe our democracy would be much more further along. Abby, as a constituent of the Congresswoman, my audience knows this too as well. I prefer speaking to film directors rather than the actors. I speak to the actors all the time. But there's something about a film director that I love because the film director controls the pacing, the timing, the bones, and the structure of a film or of a project, of a documentary. You and I were talking, Abby, offline about how I have a 7-year partnership with the Oscars, have created film summits, and I've actually helped lead Oscar campaign that became successful to them actually winning Best Film. And so film is my thing. Film and pop culture holds up a mirror to our society and peels back the layers of social constructs. Why was it important for you to lean into that moment of the vote and to create the space, and you allowed it to breathe the way that you did? Why was it important for you to lean in and create visual representation of that? And then why was it important for you to bring it in at the beginning of the film when you did?
Well,
because you brought it in early.
I brought it in early, but I did not bring it in at the beginning. So let me say,
not at the beginning, but it was like at least in the first third of the film.
Let me comment on that, because finding the right place to put the whole 9/11 segment was one of the biggest challenges of this film. And what I, have said about it is that if it comes in too early, people don't care enough about Barbara to understand what's at stake. And if it comes in too late, the people who know about her vote are looking at their watch wondering when it's coming. So you had to hit that timing really right. And you had to get into it and out of it seamlessly. So that was really the challenge that my editor and I faced from day one. I mean, we had sort of edited the piece. And why we knew we had to do a deep dive into the piece is because it's the moral center of the film. It's the moral story behind Barbara's, ethics and integrity. I mean, it wasn't the reason I decided to make the film, but it was a reason I decided to make the film. And so getting it right, both in terms of how much time it took up and what other voices there were. So I want to comment back on something you were just talking to Barbara about. The reason Barbara doesn't say something in the film about, weren't you worried about your seat, is because that wasn't what was on her mind. Gregory Meeks might have been worried about it. John Lewis was definitely worried about it for her. In retrospect, Lynn Woolsey had something to say about it. Jim Clyburn was concerned, but Barbara wasn't. And I think that is critical. That was not what Barbara was thinking about. Barbara's whole focus was on what is the right decision here. And what was her process to getting there, including going to the memorial service at the National Cathedral. And once she was clear, she was clear. And so Barbara's journey is different from the ways that other people are looking at her as the sole vote. She wasn't even thinking about whether or not she was going to be the sole vote. She was just trying to get clear, well, how am I going to vote on this? And once she was clear, that was it. Barbara's story, let me just say that I think Barbara's story is different than everybody else who was worried that, her son was worried that it was going to end her career. We hear from her son saying, I told her that I really didn't think she should vote that way. Well, she voted that way. You know what I'm saying? So everybody around her sort of understood what was at stake in a different way than Barbara did. For what was at stake for Barbara were her ethics and her morality. And my job was to show that, and to show how she came to the decision that she did. And then a little bit about, what transpired afterwards.
You talk about the decision. I think that's why I think that separates good directors and editors. And I also too believe editors don't get enough credit for the films. Without having a great editor, a film or documentary goes nowhere. The timing, I'm giving you your flowers, Abby. The timing that you used to place in was brilliant because of the fact that you kept us engaged enough. For those of us who are familiar with the story, you created dramatic visual tension within the dynamic of it. But then from there, you went in to give the Constitution and the backdrop and the biographical data of Congresswoman Lee. Sometimes that comes in too early for me, right? And it takes too long, the biographical data. Get me to the point of the significance of why I'm even sitting here, and then let me understand the Constitution of how the moment was made. I always ask my directors about what informs their decisions. You're a little bit different because you're a constituent. I believe the way this documentary was done, there was more than just being a constituent. What informed your decisions on how you handled the story of Congresswoman Lee so carefully?
Okay, so I mean, it was definitely, I mean, this was not, you know, a constituent decides to make a film about her congresswoman. It's like these films, and in this case, it took quite a while. This was almost a 4-year project, and Barbara will tell you why. She was not such a willing subject. But why I wanted to make the film, what was driving me to be persistent and to just beg her to let me do it, is that I felt like Barbara inspires me in ways that are, you know, as you're talking about, you know, there are not a lot of elected officials that inspire me the way she does. And so I wanted to get underneath that for myself. You know, what is it about Barbara that makes me such a devoted constituent? You know, and what is it about who she is, how her life story affects who she is on the floor of Congress, et cetera, that is something that I could bring to a much wider audience. You know, I have the benefit of being represented by her and of seeing a lot of this over time. But, you know, figuring out how I'm going to tell the story so it's going to be interesting to somebody in Iowa or Indiana or Virginia, that's the challenge that I faced as a filmmaker. And I had to be guided to some extent by the stuff that I think is important. So when I talk about, you know, declaring an AIDS epidemic or a state of emergency in Alameda County in the Black community at the early stages of the AIDS epidemic, that's because I think that's important, as well as Barbara thinks it's important. So much of the choices that I'm making are being filtered through things that I value. And, you know, working across the aisle, you know, getting that interview with Walter Jones and having him talk about what it meant to ally with Barbara around, you know, where he had voted initially in favor of the AOMF and then changed his mind. Well, he is I mean, he's now passed, but, you know, he was a fairly staunch conservative Republican. Well, I want to hear from a guy like him.
Yes. So Congress, I know we're short for time. So Congresswoman Lee, Abby brought in something really interesting. She invoked the cathedral. For me, that moment in cathedral with the lines of "Let us not become the evil we deplore" has been the continuous theme of how you voted, why you voted. It's the theme of the film. I'm curious now, those words, again, "Let us not become the evil we deplore." What does those words mean to you now in the backdrop of what we witnessed, the Afghanis clinging on to our military plane, the Afghanis clinging on to hope, clinging on and seeing the tears, the people being afraid of what their life is going to be like now? What does those words mean to you now in the backdrop of our departure from Afghanistan?
Yeah, and those are the words, and I quoted Reverend Nathan Baxter. He said those words in his eulogy at the memorial service. And those words, I think the picture that we're seeing now, the unfortunate, terrible trauma that's taking place, the violence, the fear and anxiety, people having to evacuate and us not being fully prepared. It's getting better. But that's the fear. I mean, it's like, gosh, this is what happened to people. What happens to people under circumstances that are warlike, under violence. And here, you know, we are 20 years of yes, an occupation. And I have to say, our troops did everything we asked them to do. So as a military brat, I know what they faced, and I know we have constantly got to support them and honor them. And so they did everything. 20 years later, this was an occupation. There's no military solution. And now we see what's happening. You can't nation build because you see what's happening. And so, yeah, our presence there created havoc in many respects. It created a situation where $2 trillion of hard-earned tax dollars of Americans was spent, where Afghan, and everyone knows there's a new report out about the corruption and the mismanagement and the stealing, right, of US tax dollars. Come on. That's why I say we've got to reduce the defense. I co-chair the Defense Spending Reduction Caucus with Mark Pocan, because yeah, we've become kind of like bad actors in many respects. And so we've got to understand and learn the lessons of the past and move forward, but we can't repeat these mistakes anymore.
For me, I view this as an operational and intelligence failure. It's unconscionable to me that the critical thinking analysis just was not done to see what has happened. As a result, now we have a humanitarian dynamic and crisis that I'm witnessing. I'm just curious for you as an elected official, what's going on through your mind in terms of what are our next steps? You know, now that we're seeing what's unfolding, you know, what are you thinking about should be America's next steps to help solve for the problem that has been created over the last week?
Well, first of all, we need to have plenty of oversight hearings, which we're going to do, and debrief. We need to know what happened. Was this faulty intelligence? No intelligence? Did we were we misled by maybe, who knows who, the Afghan government, by spies? Who knows what took place? I don't know. But I think we have to do a deep dive on what happened. Because if we don't do that, again, Sankofa moment, we're going to make mistakes of the past and we won't be able to move forward. Secondly, this is a teachable moment where the public has to understand that there are three aspects of our foreign policy: defense, diplomacy, and development. It's been out of balance. We've got to reimagine, and we've got to get engaged with our elected officials and say, we've got to put this in balance. We've got to, my budget, again, as chair of the subcommittee on appropriations that funds development and diplomacy, that's a $62 billion budget. The Pentagon, $740 billion. Now, come on. We've got to have some sense of reordering our priorities in terms of foreign policy if we're really going to achieve global peace and security. You can't have defense spending over the top where waste, fraud, and abuse is so prevalent in the Pentagon spending, where if we rebalanced it, we would have more security, we would have more development, we would have more issues around humanitarian issues. We'd help countries lift people out of poverty. We would do more on the front end so that we don't have to spend $740 billion. And so I'm adamant about asking the public to tell their members of Congress to support myself and Mark Pocan. We have a 10% defense spending cut. That's $74 billion. That won't even touch our national security. We want to put more resources in for our troops so that they don't have to end up on food stamps and Section 8. We want that $74 billion to get started to help build an energy efficient economy, a green economy, to create good paying union jobs for healthcare, for education, for housing, you know. And so the balancing or rebalancing of tax expenditures and our tax dollars has got to be this moment to analyze. We've got to use this moment to say what went wrong. And what went wrong, a heck of a lot went wrong. But it was a military first policy. And military options always on the table. Any president can use it if we're in danger of imminent threat or whatever. The Congress can authorize it. But this way, what happened, another teachable moment, you've got to make Congress get back in the mix and repeal these authorizations, which I'm doing, and so that the executive branch comes to Congress and we do our job, because we've been missing in action.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is why this documentary is so important. Speaking Truth to Power, you just heard it for yourself. Addie, I'm coming to you to wrap up to talk about the structure of the film, but Congresswoman Lee, just one personal point of privilege. I want to ask you just a personal question. I talked to my audience today over last week, really about, we are at a point where so much is happening in our world. I know as elected, you guys have been dealing with so many things at the same time. I'm just curious, in your personal opinion, do you feel we're at a time where you guys are juggling with more than normal? With the understanding you guys have always been juggling, always been busy, but I'm just curious.
Maybe, but I think it's more apparent now. We're always juggling. I mean, I'm just as an example, running to 3 committees at the same time on the Hill, juggling. And so I think elected officials juggle. Now it's more about management of how we juggle.
Fair.
And now I think it's about the public not getting exhausted by all of the stuff coming together, because a lot of people, I'm hearing this, we're exhausted, we're tired. And so people have to engage in self-care during this period and have to be mindful of what trauma does and have to be mindful of their health. And so it's a lot. But for those of us who've been in this, we know how to manage all of that and do it, and hopefully do it in the proper way so that we can achieve our goals. But I understand what's going on in the public psyche right now. This country, in many respects, there's a level of trauma and fear, anxiety, and despair. And once that settles in, though, when people don't have hope, when they can't manage what's going on, then guess who takes over? The white supremacists, the warmongers, the corporate elite. And so if you want that to happen, then, stay where you are. But if not, try to help however you get through these periods, whether it's prayer, whether it's meditation, whether it's whatever you do, try to do more of it so that you can keep working for justice and having hope.
I love it. Abby, as we go, as I told you, I want to talk to the structure of the film, because Congresswoman is has so much knowledge and so much strength and so much self-awareness of identity and the issues at play. What I love about this documentary is that you were able to keep all of that just so linear. Documentaries can easily fall by the wayside. It can go off tracks and try and cover too much at the same time, and you lose the thesis. What were the guardrails that you had in place to ensure that this documentary, the thesis of speaking truth to power, was linear? So what guardrails did you have in place?
Well, I think, I think the question we kept asking ourselves, and it's hard for me now to remember what died on the cutting room floor, but the question we had to keep asking ourselves is, how does this scene or this story, advance as you're saying, the thesis of the film, which is speaking truth to power, and, and the sort of the other theme of integrity and, and there's another thing that I think I don't say it explicitly in the film, but Barbara's ahead of her time on so many issues. That goes back to declaring the AIDS emergency in the Black community in Oakland. That goes back to that vote in 2001. Barbara, it's like, she's kind of a little bit of a canary in a coal mine here. And if we look at the things that she is fighting hard for and the issues that she is standing up for, we are going to learn something about where this country needs to be before the country gets there. So I feel like that was part of, kind of the story I was trying to tell. And then there was another theme that really comes through, a comment that Ayanna Pressley makes, which is that those closest to the pain should be closest to the power because of what they understand, having lived through some of the issues at stake here. So Barbara having been on, federal assistance, and Barbara having been a single mother, and Barbara having been a victim of domestic violence, all those things inform so much of her policy perspective, that in drawing that link, then you say, oh, well, isn't it a little weird that we keep electing people who have no experience with poverty or, having to fight their way to get their kids educated or whatever it is. And, I kind of wanted to, that was another theme for me that was very important. So once I kind of knew, what it was I wanted to say in the film, then each piece of it, and there's another theme, which is about mentoring. So there are two levels of mentoring. Barbara was mentored by Shirley Chisholm. Barbara has then mentored many of the young, newer members of Congress who got elected in 2018, but even people before that, like Lisa Blunt Rochester, felt mentored by her. And then we have all the young people who are on the civil rights tour with her, who are also being mentored by her. So this notion that it's like you have walked through a door, but you are constantly looking behind you to see who you can help welcome through that same door, that has been part of Barbara's life from day one. As I say, Shirley mentored her well, and then she has been mentoring ever since she's been in a position to do that.
I love it. Well, as we close, Abby, how can people see this film? It is out now. It got released this Friday. How can people who have not seen it this Friday, how can they see it? How can they find it? Where can they find it?
Okay, it is streaming on Amazon Prime and on iTunes. So you just really have to know the title of the film, which is Barbara Lee, Speaking Truth to Power. Google that somehow on your, Amazon Prime or iTunes account, and you will get to see it. And if you happen to live in Los Angeles, Berkeley, Cambridge, or Sebastopol, or San Francisco, it's actually playing in a theater for a week near you. So it's got a theatrical release as well as its streaming release. But for the average person listening for this show, find it on Amazon Prime or iTunes, and please watch it so you too can be inspired by Barbara Lee.
Thank you so much, Abby, for this film. Congresswoman Barbara Lee, thank you so much for your Constitution. Thank you for always speaking truth to power. And always thank you for keeping your Constitution in mind, knowing you can always have a career outside of politics. Thank you guys for coming on the Mike Muse Show. It's been a pleasure.